Week 15 is underway. If you are in your fancy playoffs, you are very happy right now if you started Kyle Pitts. But there may still be some tricky decisions to navigate, especially if you are streaming your QBs, tight ends, and defenses. So, Ed, what are options for QB if we are in a position where we are maybe a little bit short?
Yes, well, the why isn't Jacoby Brissett more highly rostered feature takes a break this week as he's got a very tough matchup against the Texans. However, I would not be surprised if he defies the odds and maintains his ridiculous consistency. So we've got three other options for you. We mentioned him on the main show, JJ McCarthy versus the Cowboys, currently only 25% rostered. Could he be someone to lock in for your fancy playoffs? He was mentioned in that feature we did a few weeks ago. Impressed last time out against the Commanders and has got that friendly run of fixtures starting this week against the Cowboys, who are giving up the most fancy points per game to quarterbacks. And he has the Giants next week, who are giving up the second most fancy points per game to quarterbacks. Seems like a bit of a no-brainer. I suppose the only caveat I'd throw in there is that he's not looked hugely consistent. So he could throw in a bit of a clanger, I guess. But, you know, the stats seem to suggest he's in for a good week. Brock Purdy, much higher rostered. He's against the Titans this week. Now, he's highly rostered, but currently only started in 40% of leagues. That figure should be significantly higher this week as he comes up against the Titans defense, who've given up the fourth most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks across the last 4 weeks. Purdy always seems to have a solid floor, and I just think this matchup gives him the opportunity for a top 10 QB performance this week, maybe even top 5. But yeah, he's someone I'd be looking to lock in this week. And finally, Marcus Mariota, only 21% rostered, deputizing again for Jaden Daniels. He's been very solid when called upon this year. He's had 3 QB1 weeks from his 6 starts, which included QB3 against the Broncos a couple of weeks ago. Hugely favourable matchup this week against the Giants, who are giving up the second most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Surely another QB1 week is on the cards from Marcus Mariota this week.
And we will be mentioning Marcus Mariota again shortly in the show. If you are joining us for the first time or you're still not subscribed, though, please do take a moment to give us a subscribe, a like, and a share for all of your fantasy content through the season and then throughout the off-season as well. Ed, I've got some tight end options for us this week as well. I think unless you have drafted one of the top 3 or 4 tight ends, most of us have been pivoting over the course of the season. And I've got 3 options for you this week who all have favourable matchups and are all widely available. So I'm going to start off with Theo Johnson, who has the Commanders. He's become a dependable target for Jackson Dart. 5 targets a game on average over the season, and Washington are conceding the 5th most fantasy points per game, 16.05 to tight ends. So he could be someone to lock in this week. But we have 2 tight ends that could be great pickups and lead you to a fantasy championship because of what they've not only got this week, but beyond as well. So I'm going to start with Isaiah Likely. We mentioned him on the main show. He's got the Bengals. The Bengals have given up the most fantasy points per game to tight ends. We say it every single week, and it continues to be so. Mark Andrews is the obvious kind of mention here, but over the last 2 weeks, Isaiah Likely's been the more dangerously targeted player where he's kind of getting his receptions, and he's also been tight end 9 and tight end 10 with 6 targets in each game. Now, had he not lost the ball at that goal line punch out against the Bengals, he would have ended up tight end 4 that week. Had the touchdown stood last week, that absolutely should have stood last week, he'd have been tight end 3. I think we're having a very different conversation about Isaiah Likely. Now,
shoulda, woulda, coulda, Mark. Shoulda, woulda, coulda.
We don't chase missed touchdowns. We do chase opportunity. And he was
true.
in those positions to get those dangerous targets. So that is kind of what I'm chasing here this week. And after the Bengals, that follows up with New England, who are giving up the 9th most fantasy points per game to tight ends as well. So he could be a good option for this week and next. And then Darren Waller. He's got the Steelers this week, then the Bengals, then Tampa Bay. So that's the teams conceding the 6th most, the 8th most, and the most to tight ends. On top of that, that 8th will go up for Tampa after Kyle Pitts just scored 1,000 points in Thursday Night Football. In his 3 fully fit games, he averaged 15.2 fantasy points per game. It is definitely a risk because we've not seen it since his return from injury. But if you're short at tight end, fortune favours the brave. He could well be the difference maker on your roster to take you some decent points and towards that championship game. Out of those, would you have any interest in Likely or Waller, or have you had to pick either of them up?
I've Waller's somebody who kind of been a bit of a yo-yo, hasn't he? Like he was on the waiver wire, off the waiver wire, with his injuries and stuff. And so I think I picked him up in one league this week where he'd been dropped a few weeks ago. So they're all great shouts, and I think I've got Likely in one or two leagues where I've got other tight ends, and he's definitely going to be someone I'm locking in over the next couple of weeks.
Let's take a look then at some streaming defense options this week. Don't get lazy and just stick with whoever you've got on the bench. Whoever you've got locked in at defense at the minute. Have a look at that matchup and why are these three options for you this week?
Yeah, I've got three options for you. Again, I'm not going to mention the Saints. They were mentioned on our easiest playoff schedule feature. Their fantasy playoff run is insane. Panthers, Jets, and Titans. They're still only 17% rostered. So there's a fourth little bonus one for you this week. But in terms of the ones up on the screen, Vikings, 30% rostered against the Cowboys. Currently sits defense 10 after an impressive couple of weeks, including 19 points against the Commanders last time out, which included a couple of interceptions. They're a potentially explosive defense of the Vikings who can make big plays, and they rarely give up big points. I mean, it's a tough matchup for Dak and the Cowboys. So, you could argue they're up against a tough offense. So it'll be interesting to see who comes out on top. But I think the Vikings defense will put up decent points. Panthers, even lower rostered, 17% against the Saints this week. Defense 20 overall. They showed flashes this season. I mean, it's a huge game for the Panthers, isn't it? As they look to seal a playoff place. But I think they're coming fresh off the bye, so I expect them to be firing on both sides of the ball. And they've got the Saints and Tyler Shook. He's looked solid, but he's always good for a pick. So I fancy the Panthers defense to have a good week this week. And the 49ers, much higher rostered, and their rostership doesn't make sense. I think it proves it. Well, it does make sense because people draft on name and reputation rather than streaming their defenses. They've been drafted at the start of the season and just stayed in lineups. Anyway, they've hit form in the last couple of weeks, picking up double figure fantasy figures for the first time since week one. And I just think their matchup this week against the Titans and Cam Ward is very enticing for any defense. So, yeah, I would be locking them in now, although they maybe shouldn't have been on your roster for most of the season.
No, that's exactly what I thought when I was putting the graphic together. And I've not seen the rostership percentage on your notes yet. I was just thinking, why are they in there? And the answer is they're the 49ers, and they're good on defense, anecdotally. Let's have a look then once you've got your main lineups locked in, or if you're out of the playoffs, so DFS is the only place for you to get your fantasy joy. We've got some stacks of the week for you. We've got two very different stacks of the week. I've gone extremely expensive. So I've gone Matt Stafford and Puka Nacua. It's expensive, it's obvious, but it makes perfect sense this week. We have got the QB5 and the wide receiver 2, who get the Lions defense for giving up the 6th most fantasy points per game over the season to QBs. That's second most over the last 4 weeks. And are giving up the second most to wide receivers over the course of the season. That is the most over the last 4 weeks as well. Nacua is averaging 10 targets per game. Stafford is averaging 3 passing touchdowns per game. Expect both of those numbers to be surpassed, I'm going to say, mid-third quarter in this game. I think it itches to be a proper shootout. Adding a little bit of season into that, it's a Matt Stafford revenge game. Let's have some more. It's a Jared Goff revenge game. I'm calling this one a shootout, Ed, that is going to be gold for DFS. It's going to be a highly targeted game, isn't it, for DFS in general? If you want to pay up, though, this is the logical place to do it for DFS this week.
Yeah, I mean, a double revenge game, that is your ultimate dream matchup, isn't it? So, yeah, this is There's no way this isn't a high-scoring game. And you're welcome to clip that next week when it's like 10 all or something like that.
If you don't want to go high price, though, you want to have some money to spend elsewhere on different targets, who's your stack?
Yeah, my stack is not expensive. I wouldn't quite say secret stack territory, but cheap nonetheless. And we've already referenced Mariota earlier in the show. I mean, in fact, if you took this matchup, took this stack, Mariota and McLaurin on Fantasy Game Day, it leaves you with over £5,700 per player for the rest of your team. So lots of money to play with. Mariota, as I've said, has had a lot of game time this season. And in his 6 starts, he's thrown 9 touchdowns, averaging 17.5 points. And I think you'd take that at this price. McLaurin, injury-ravaged season. But he did have his best game of the season against Denver a couple of weeks ago, where he was targeted 14 times by Mariota. But the main reason I like to look at this stat is that they're up against that New York Giants defense, who are giving up huge points to quarterbacks, huge points to wide receivers. I just think it's a great value stack, and it gives you, maybe the money to go out and get, a huge player, like marquee player at your as your captain's pick, someone like JT potentially.
Yeah, you're right. It's the value that it produces. We're not going to get the same points you're going to get with Stafford and Nacua, but you've got the money to spare as well. So, yeah, 2 different approaches for you to consider. If you are going for my approach, though, you're going to need to save some money. So I'm just going to throw in a little bonus, Ed, a bargain basket pick. We've given you the reasons already, but Isaiah Likely at 2,800 on Fantasy Game Day, 3,400 on Draft Kings. Cheaper in both formats to Mark Andrews, and genuinely, I feel confident it will be likely that we'll get the highest score out of the 2 this week. And if there is a difference, it will be negligible. We've said increased workload recent weeks. Bengals given the most fantasy points to tight ends. Isaiah Likely, I think, is going to be very highly rostered in DFS and should be more highly rostered in your regular fantasy matchups as well.
Can I just say,
yeah,
I'm absolutely praying that Isaiah Likely has a good game, because his name is tailor-made for fantasy heroes. So
please, yes.
Please, Isaiah, we've got the puns ready to go. So, yeah, please have a good week. Even if it's against the Bengals, I'll take it.
And we've not got a Sunday night bet club section, but as we said last week, Charlie Kohler is the tight end 3 at the Ravens. So stick a bet on him to get an anytime touchdown as well. That is also likely to come in. Finally, then, before we wrap up, we're going to have a quick comment about the TH Fantasy Football Bestball Bonanza and celebrate all of our quarterfinalists. So our 16 teams through. We've gone to head-to-head games this week. So the winners of each of those matchups will progress through to the semis, and then we will finish in week 17 when every fantasy format should finish with our fantasy 4-way final. So congratulations to everyone on the board there. Once it all is said and everything's in the books, we will have a bit of a review show looking at some data points from the season as well, and also crown our 17 divisional championships. It's all still to play for in your individual divisions. Well, Ed, that is our whistle-stop tour through week 15. Anything you would like to add before we retire for the week?
No, just best of luck in your fantasy playoffs.
So we'll hopefully see you in the semi-finals of those fantasy playoffs next week for our week 16 preview and all the reviews of week 15 as well, including Heroes and Zeros featuring Isaiah Likely. We shall see. But that's all from me. It's all from Ed. All that remains to be said is ta-ta and farewell. Over to Malcolm.
You have been listening to the team from TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Twitter and Instagram.